Everyone talks about success, about successful cases, about which successful projects are being sold, about profitability, and so on. Today, I really want to thoroughly discuss anti-cases, specifically about 7 significant red flags that can appear in a project, or more precisely, why we might ultimately refuse to sell a developer's particular project. And this is a more important topic than just success. Why? Because out of all the developers, out of all the projects on the market, let's say there are 200, most of them, at least 90%, have problems and difficulties in their projects. But from the pictures, from the presentations, you often can't tell them apart. That's why today we're going to discuss how to spot an obviously doomed or risky project, or the 7 red flags that indicate a project is headed for failure. Subscribe, hit the bell, like the video, and let's get started with our topic. The first thing I'd like to start with isn't documents, land, reliability, or quality, but rather the financial models, and the numbers presented in the financial models in the forecast of your returns from the developer or the agent offering you this property. And often, when we analyze the financial models of different projects, we frequently see discrepancies in the numbers compared to the facts. What does this mean? It means that these forecasts are, so to speak, pulled out of thin air or just made up when a developer says, I want my project to rent out for $200 a day. But when you start asking on what basis, on what data are these forecasts made? And I don't want to guess the percentage, but the vast majority, definitely more than 50%, I think, up to 70%, of developers cannot justify the figures in their financial models. And the scariest part is that even the management company chosen by the developer for this project, the one that prepared the financial models, even they can't justify the numbers shown in the financial models. They just refer to the market average. Friends, the average temperature in the hospital, right? What is it there? 17 or 18 degrees? One person is dead, 0. The other has a temperature of 40, so on average it's about 20. There you go. That's not how you should measure things. You need to look at the local area, the class segment of the property being built, and the competitors that are within the orbit of this project in the same class with a similar concept and roughly the same management company. That's why you should always consider several projects within this orbit and analyze the entire market in your segment and your location. Very often the numbers in financial models are just made up by developers, agents, and management companies. I recommend paying attention to this and simply just ask your agent or developer to justify these financial models. Hidden commissions, whether it's management, the management company, or the sale of the property. This is something I encounter very often. During negotiations with developers and later with management companies, these are hidden payments, unaccounted taxes, OTA services, additional expenses, depreciation, personal income taxes like our PIT, and so on, and so on. Here's one of the latest cases. Just last week, a developer approached us for consulting services. We are helping him package his product, or more precisely, repackage what he has. He has a great location, a good project, good quality, the paperwork and everything else, but the concept was wrong, the packaging was wrong, and it's not in demand on the market. We analyzed this project, saw its huge potential, and understood why it isn't selling. Yes, there are a number of reasons. One of them is incorrect packaging, concept, and wrong market positioning. We repackaged this project, and when we got to it and looked at the contract with the management company, it turned out that, as with everyone else on the market, they said 45% are management expenses, but there were hidden fees. But when we actually uncovered all the expenses, it turned out that 71% goes to the management company's expenses. They also included in fine print that if they hit the target, they get a bonus as well. OTA services aren't included, taxes aren't included, and depreciation and a number of other expenses. If you include all of these and calculate the financial model properly and honestly, it turns out that the investor only gets 29% of the total revenue, which is just insane. And in fact, the developer had already signed a contract with this management company without fully understanding the details. Only thanks to our consulting, our intervention, he terminated that contract and signed a new one with another reputable management company, which only takes 45% for all expenses. Moreover, there, the calculation isn't even based on percentages, but on specific expenses for staff, towels, laundry, depreciation, and so on. So all these expenses are calculated not as a percentage where a margin is built in. The management company adds an extra hidden margin. We know all these tricks, so we know how to uncover these loopholes used by management companies. It's basically a scam. In other words, they use deceptive methods to create an additional margin for themselves. We uncovered all of this, and as a result, management expenses dropped from 71% to 45%. You understand that mathematically, that's 29% profitability from turnover. Everyone except the investor will make a profit from the investor's earnings. In other words, the investor will only make money if the market experiences massive growth and everything skyrockets, and even then, just a little. But the management company will definitely make good money because they've built hidden fees into many processes. In other words, their own hidden margin. Be careful, pay attention to the numbers. The next red flag is fake guarantees. What does that mean? Very often, developers, for the sake of marketing, sales, and making their project more attractive, offer inflated sky-high guarantees of returns, guarantees of profitability, guarantees on the construction itself, and so on. If there are too many guarantees, you should always ask how and with what your guarantee is secured. On what basis is this guarantee being given? Because indeed, some developers are very confident in their project, take great pride in their work, and truly create worthy projects. And they are capable of providing guarantees. But let's take a closer look. For example, they offer 12%, 15%, or sometimes even 20% guaranteed returns from a real estate property. The average market yield is 12 to 14%, and that's if everything goes well, everything turns out great, the developer doesn't make any mistakes, the market doesn't crash or change, and so on. In other words, that's in the best case scenario, 12 to 14%. If you got in at the right stage at a good price, then a pessimistic forecast is 10% per year, which in principle isn't bad by European standards. 10% per year is roughly the pessimistic forecast. The developer promises 15%, and he understands that I'll definitely get 10%, and if there's some kind of crisis, maybe 8%. He gets these 7% in the first year, and if there's a 2-year guarantee, that's twice as much, 14% over 2 years. He needs to put in his own money to compensate if things don't go according to plan. Now imagine everything goes wrong, and he has to pay all the investors 14%. That's a huge amount of money relative to the unit cost. Sometimes it's the entire profitability of the project. In other words, all the profit the developer made from the project over 2 years of construction, he has to give up for this guarantee, unless he doesn't intend to do so. Study the contracts very carefully, examine the justifications, and look into what is guaranteed, what is secured, what backs up this guarantee. When you're offered terms that seem too good to be true, you should always ask what backs up this guarantee. And these terms as well. Read the contracts carefully, conduct due diligence, thoroughly research the developer and the project, and review all documentation related to both the developer and the project. The next red flag is related to management companies. If you are prohibited from living in the property yourself, or if changing the management company or the mechanism for changing the management company is not fully clear, this is always a potential problem. Let's put it this way. In any project, absolutely any project, no matter what the contracts say, if 51% of the shareholders, members of the complex, or investors in the complex make a decision, then it's hard to block it. In principle, that decision will be made. But if the developer and the management company have a mechanism, there are actually a lot of mechanisms. Restrictions on your rights? That's why you must carefully study the management agreement. Study the terms that are being set for you, so that you don't end up in a situation where, for example, you can't refuse the management company, or you get 0 returns and all your money is stolen, and you won't even be able to do anything about it. My personal experience in Ukraine, in Kiev, was when my partners and I, there were 4 of us, invested money in opening a business club with its own clubhouse. It was a huge establishment, 700 square meters, premium level, in Zarske Selo on Pechersk in Kiev. It was quite an expensive house. We rented it, renovated it, and invested a lot of money. And one of the partners turned out to be a fraudster who set up and cheated many people, not just us in this project, but in other projects as well. So we ended up in this situation because of our own. Who will figure out now why? Was it due to some carelessness, inexperience, or just too much trust in this person? Because for many years, he had been building trusting relationships. It never even crossed our minds that he could turn out to be a fraudster in the end. But the fact is, we, the shareholders, couldn't even replace the director. That's how everything was set up, and for several years our money was simply being stolen. They were just draining this project to zero, even though we knew the project was profitable, and all the shareholders couldn't do anything about it. To this very day. That's why I want to draw your attention to contracts. What are you signing and what rights do you have? Because sometimes investors at this stage, before making a decision, don't check the documents, or at best only check some of the documents. They look at the investment, real estate, or investor agreements, but when it comes to management, they think they'll figure it out later. I recommend sorting it out right away. A basic example is the absence of a management company. You need to understand that the developer is responsible for the security of your investment. The documents, the land, the quality of construction, the financing timelines, all of this is the security of your investment, and it rests on the developer's shoulders. The profitability of your investment always lies solely with the management company. And the developer, as the general manager, should appoint and select a management company for this project. And until it is chosen, even the financial models, even those prepared by true real estate, yes, based on the market, we have our own software that gathers analytics on the occupancy rates of the entire Bali real estate market. Even taking our professionalism into account, these financial models still need to be provided by the management company. So even if the market rents at $150, the management company must be able to achieve that and actually do it. That's why until a management company is selected, I highly recommend you pay attention and really focus on the strategy. The developer should have a clear understanding of who this will be, because there really could be a tender process. We've had cases like this, for example, with the developer Nexa. We started pre-sale sales even before there was a management company, but Nexa has a dozen completed and ongoing projects, and they already have properties under management that are being rented out. They were choosing the best among several of the largest and most reliable management companies. It's a different story when a tender is held. And based on the results of the tender, you already understand whom the developer might choose. Moreover, they already have experience working with management companies and know what they're doing. But it's a completely different situation when a developer is building for the first time and says, yes, we'll launch, we'll build, and then we'll figure it out later. That's a very bad strategy. And we've turned down many developers for the reason that they, say, I'll build it and figure things out as I go. I'll sign someone up. I say, look, my friend, the financial models you're providing, they haven't been confirmed by a management company. You don't even have one yet. What makes you think that what you've just made up out of thin air actually reflects reality and that any management company would agree to implement it? You understand, right? That's why, of course, it's important to have a management company or to hold a tender, or for the developer to have relevant experience working with different management companies, building your own management company, and managing this area. Because if there's neither experience, nor a tender, nor a management company, that's a red flag. And of course, the last point on our list, but by no means the least important, is the legal status of the land, problems with documents, and any kind of schemes or manipulations. Let's put it this way. The legal aspect is one of the most crucial factors for the safety of your investment. So, if there's any uncertainty with the land, with the documents, or if there are any unclear financial schemes, in other words, any legal or financial question marks or any shady situation, this is a very clear red flag. You need to be aware of this. Or, for example, if the developer hasn't fully registered the land yet, say, during the process of paying in installments, that's normal. And if, for example, it's a leasehold, you can immediately sign the contract and set up the installment plan. You can start making payments while already having the certificate. In that case, you have the land documents and everything is fine. But if, for example, it's a freehold, the landlord won't transfer the land until full payment is made, so you won't have it until then. You won't get the land certificate until the land is fully paid off, and that's also a normal model, and it's perfectly reasonable to explain it this way. The investor shows the documents. You don't have the certificate yet, but here's the installment plan, here's the payment plan. Here's the preliminary agreement that was signed, which will later be signed at the notary's office. And your contract will state that if this doesn't happen, you'll get a full refund. But you need to know this. That's why the recommendation is don't proceed without a lawyer and without true real estate. We hire lawyers, we work with legal firms, we have our own legal and financial expertise within our company. We conduct qualified checks and identify these kinds of red flags. So don't go into deals without us or without a lawyer. Don't even agree to contracts, because you'll still have to renegotiate them with a professional later. And as a bonus red flag, it's the presence of signs of a financial pyramid scheme. A financial pyramid, let me remind you, let's synchronize our understanding of the terminology. This is when I build the first project, collect money from its sales. I expand, scale up, build teams, invest in marketing, commissions, events, and everything else. I spend. There's a bit of a shortfall in funds to actually complete this project. I've spent everything, or almost everything. So I start a second project, sell it at a higher price, and use part of that money to finish the first project. And in this way, I keep growing. So the signs of a financial pyramid can be found in almost every developer who is working on more than one project. There's no such thing as not moving money from one pocket to another. In my experience, in the experience of my partner who has been in real estate for over 10 years, in Europe, Ukraine, and Indonesia, and in the experience of my friends and colleagues who have spent decades in real estate, no one has ever said that. I know of a case where a developer has two projects and never transfers funds between them. Money from one to the other. That almost never happens. But moving things from one pocket to another, that's always happening. Something is always being shifted around. So there are varying degrees of criticality when it comes to signs of a financial pyramid. Because when everything is budgeted, you collect the money and allocate it to that project, paying for administrative expenses, marketing, development, PR, and so on, partly from the first project and partly from the second. That's one story. But when you've spent everything from the first project and you have to sell the second one to finish the first, then you start the third to finally finish the first and begin wrapping up the second and then the fourth. You need to make sales to finish the second, and you're already short on funds for the third by half. This is a very bad situation, and it always ends in disaster. And remember, there's a saying, rapid growth kills faster than slow declines. The faster this pyramid grows, the higher the likelihood, the greater the certainty that in the event of a financial crisis, a sales freeze, market turmoil, a war in Taiwan, and so on, that is, any events that shake up the market and freeze it for half a year, in the case of a financial pyramid, especially if it has bloated administrative expenses, pose a huge, huge risk. It's often difficult to detect. Inside the company, it's hard to gauge just how critical this problem is, but I recommend at least paying attention to it. Talk to the developer, ask them tough questions, keep an eye on the company's traction, monitor their projects, their prices, how and what they're selling, how they conduct their business, what materials they use, how they build, their construction timelines, and so on. I hope this was helpful. These are definitely the questions you need to be asking yourself. Before you invest, and even before you start thinking about investing, when choosing projects, run them through this checklist. See if any part of the project doesn't measure up, or if there are any red flags. I recommend reaching out to True Real Estate if you want to invest reliably and safely only in those projects that have been selected by our company. At the moment, out of 120 developers, actually a bit more than that, we have chosen to work with only 7. Currently, the 8th developer is undergoing our vetting process, which has already been going on for several months. This is an extremely rigorous selection process. Of course, we also can't be 100% certain. No one can get inside the developer's head. No one can guarantee their personal safety. In the end, accidents can always happen. No one is immune. Naturally, we are not the final authority either. But at the very least, by conducting such a thorough check, we are significantly increasing the chances of a safe transaction. Subscribe to our channel, like, and hit the notification bell. I hope you found this helpful. Leave a few words, a comment.